So I'd like to talk to you about Mars now, and I even have my reddish color going here because Mars is a reddish planet. And we've covered Mercury. There's some interesting things there. Venus is very interesting because of the hotness that it has, and we threw in comparison with the Earth there. But now, as I sort of start proceeding here with more planets here, I always start questioning my instructional effectiveness of what I'm doing here because this isn't all that fun. Just sort of marching through the planets, talking about, well, does it have a magnetic field? Does it have an atmosphere? Blah blah blah, that sort of thing. So I'm going to just pick once again what I think is the most important part about Mars, which is actually none of that stuff, but it's actually getting there. I find that to be absolutely fascinating. And we've been there a lot. There's a lot of robotic rovers that have driven around on Mars. There's a lot of probes that have orbited the planet, and we're learning a lot about it. But getting there, even independent of the science that those rovers are telling us, getting there is the most fun thing about Mars, I think. But I do feel obliged to give you some facts about Mars, just so you can have a bit of working knowledge about it. So that's what I'll do in this video here, but it'll just be sort of a quick cursory look at some of the key features on Mars, but we won't just focus on the planetary attributes as much. Okay, so off we go then. Here's Mars, of course, and your first up here getting going on it here is, of course, as you know, it is the fourth planet there. And as we went all the way back to talk about the AUs here, it's 1.5 times the AUs from the sun that the Earth is. And so this little distance here is the 50% more from the sun that you'd have to get to from Earth relative to get to Mars. And being the reddish planet, of course, the Greek mythology here, it's the god of war. And that's primarily because of its red color. That's obviously visible in the sky. I'll show you some pictures in a minute here. And of course, the red color that the planet has is due to rust on its surface. So good old iron oxide, that reddish color that you even see on rusty metals on Earth. That's where it comes from. The tilt, as you know, these planets, a lot of them have tilts here, is about 25 degrees or so. So it's similar to Earth. And the rotation, once on its axis, is something like 24 and a quarter hours, 24 and a half hours, a little bit longer than the Earth. And the planet itself has sort of no geology, and it's also a very small planet. And sort of for these two reasons combined here, there is no magnetic field, or depending on where you read, there might be one, but it's very, very weak. But the takeaway from this either small or lack of a magnetic field is there's no solar wind protection on the planet, which I think we've already discussed. Okay, so onwards then. Here's a good picture of Mars here, and you can find these all over the internet if you're so interested, but it's definitely the reddish planet, and it has a lot of craters and geology to be discovered, and I'll just give you a brief overview of some of it here. Okay, here's an actual picture from the surface of Mars. You might see something like this in the night sky. There's the reddish planet right there. You can see that. So it definitely looks reddish if you get a good look at it. Here's a picture I took of Mars through my telescope, small telescope, and I'm not very good at this. It's very blurry, I acknowledge. But one of the things that's also sort of very defining characteristic of Mars is it has these white polar caps. You might think, oh, it has like a north and south pole like the Earth. Well, kind of, but it's not water. It's frozen carbon dioxide. So Mars is very famous for having polar caps made out of frozen carbon dioxide. Here's the size comparison right here. Here's good old Earth where you live, and here's Mars right here. So you can see that it is relatively a small planet. And there's Mercury and our moon right there. So see, Mars just isn't very large. There's a size comparison right here. This is Mars right here. Mars can suffer from global dust storms that can arise here. So on one telescopic view on June 26, 2001, pretty clear. You can see some wispy clouds or the polar ice caps and some geology in there. Then, of course, just later that year on September 4th, completely covered. Can hardly make out any of the surface features, save for maybe the polar ice caps there, and just a global dust storm can happen. And I think if you watch the movie The Martian, that was sort of started happening in the early part of the movie there when all the big tragedy occurred. Big winds started to appear. Here again, some actual photos from Mars here. And I just love this one right here on the bottom because this is you're looking at a sunset on Mars. So again, it's just one of the things that makes you sort of very happy to be alive in these times, because we can actually observe sunsets on other planets. So I think that's kind of cool. Mars does have 2 moons, Phobos and Deimos here. They're very, very small. And we think that Mars got these moons by gravitational capture. So it's the kind of thing where Mars was likely sitting here like this, sort of formed or forming, and along came, a piece of rock like this, sort of coming along like this with some speed v, and just by happenstance, Mars is able to gravitationally capture it and keep it in its orbit, although we don't think these moons will be there forever because they're apparently slowly decaying into the planet. Apparently this orbit isn't as locked as it needs to be, and so someday they'll just crash into the planet and it'll be gone. Okay, more on in the next video.